Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I hope everybody can see me, hear me at this point. I just wanted to take this moment to introduce myself. My name is Michael Valenzuela. I am a supervisor in imports here in Houston. So we cover the seaports of Houston as well as the airport of Houston. I'm part of the Office of Regulatory Affairs. So just kind of give you a little bit of a background about the infrastructure of the FDA. We have the ORA, or Office of Regulatory Affairs, which is us, the field folks. And then up at the headquarters, we have what are called centers. And each center specializes in the commodities that we have jurisdiction over. So for example, we have a center for veterinary medicine. We have a center for medical devices. We have a center for drugs. And for the topic for this workshop, we have a specific center that deals with biologics. So we often out in the field have to work and collaborate with our center folks in the biologic side. You'll hear me often refer to them as CBER, Center for Biologics and Evaluation Research. So CBER is their acronym. So with that, we can go ahead and proceed with the presentation. Next slide, please. And the next one, yeah. So my agenda today is that I will be covering the general import entry process, entry admissibility and regulatory requirements of CBER or biological products. And then we'll talk a little bit about the requirements for entry later on, and if there's any questions that I am not able to address at this time, there's an email address at the end of the presentation where you can send inquiries, especially for imports related to FDA regulated biologics. Next slide. So like I said, we have different centers. So specifically today, we're going to be talking about Center for Biologics and Evaluation Research, or CBER. So what does CBER regulate? Biological products are those including blood and blood products, vaccines, allergenics, gene therapies, human cells and tissue products, or HCTPS, and that they are intended for implantation, transplantation, or infusion. These may include bone, ligament, skin, cornea, semen, or other reproductive tissue. These are just a few examples, but there are many others, and they're listed in our website. By the way, a copy of this presentation is available, and there's some links embedded in this presentation so you can gather a little bit more information, especially about what we cover and some other resources. Next slide. Here is a definition of a drug. Included is here because some biologics, as you know, can be considered as drugs. So a drug is an article intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or animals, or articles intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or animals. Also, components are considered drugs, components that are made, components of drugs. We regulate them as drugs. Next slide. The next few slides, I'm going to go over these topics: screening, initial admissibility, examination, sampling, flowchart of an entry. When I say entry, this is cargo shipment. And finally, the FDA regulatory requirements for CBER or FDA regulated products regarding this topic. I just wanted to differentiate a little bit. Like I had briefly mentioned, we're talking about cargo environment here. We do not have a presence at the border, land border, or at the airport. So we rely on our partner agencies to make any referrals to us that if they deem FDA review is needed, especially if items that are being brought in by hand carry or through baggage, may require FDA review. So if, certain aspects of that may be reviewed at the port of entry, and then they may be referred to cargo for further processing. But the slides I'm covering today is strictly in a cargo environment. Next slide. So I think we skipped. Can we go back to slide 7, please? Is there no slide 7? Oh. Well, let me just kind of talk you through that missing slide. So it's just about what FDA process is like in the beginning. So FDA uses a risk-based approach and analytical tools when reviewing import entries. But again, this is in a cargo environment. Our screening tool, this is an automated system. It's called Predict. It helps speed our review, and it helps us focus on high-risk products. FDA's ability to make sound risk-based decisions depend on the data that is transmitted. So accurate data should be provided to us when filing an entry or a cargo shipment through CBP. So on this slide right here, number 8, entries, it kind of summarizes in a little bit more detail. The entries are submitted to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, who then refers the entries to FDA whenever there's FDA-regulated products, including biologics, for further review. FDA screening tools use various sources of information to assess risk, such as a firm's previous compliance history, and this I'm talking about the manufacturer and the importer. We also look at inherent risk of a product. So as you know, different products have different inherent risks, and previous history of importers, manufacturers, and shippers. So we basically grade each of those factors to kind of make a final determination on the risk level, and we kind of arrange our review process based on the high risk. Then FDA begins the admissibility process. We conduct an on-screen review and determine admissibility by assessing compliance with the appropriate requirements. Next slide. So how does the FDA determine if an entry line or a product will be examined or sampled? So we ask, is it a high-risk product? Was there violative shipment history? Or it may be just a normal surveillance or part of our work plan obligations. So they may not necessarily be a for-cause issue, but we're just required to review and examine a certain percentage of products coming in on a surveillance basis. Other factors are involved, but these are just a few examples of why we may take a closer look. Just to give you a perspective, actually, since we cover, when I say we, FDA here in imports, we cover a vast amount of products and commodities. The biggest is the food items, from canned foods to fresh food, seafood, vegetables and produce, and things like that. That encompasses a huge percentage of what we look at. But we also look at drugs, either bulk ingredients for further manufacturing, or they could be finished products. We also look at dietary supplements. We also look at medical devices, from class 1 to class 3 types of medical devices that are coming in from other countries. And then there are the biologics. Comparing those commodities, I would say that the biologics importation that we see is a smaller portion of, a smaller percentage of what we see overall. So that's just wanted to give you a kind of a high-level view of the level or the number of shipments that we see in imports, cargo. Next slide. So FDA may take the following actions when first reviewing an entry. So we can release the product based on our entry review. We can request additional information, or we can set up for examination and sampling, which honestly I would say is pretty rare that we actually take a look at things, because there's not much we can do except maybe for labeling examination, because, you know, in a test tube of biological stuff, we can't do much out in the field. We pretty much have to send them up for lab examination. Or we can send them to our compliance branch as a detention request if we see any evidence for any type of violations or deficiencies in the shipment. And then our compliance branch makes the final decision on the admissibility process. Next slide. So the next two slides are not specifically going to be related to biologics or CBER-related products, but I wanted to include them in case there are people on the call who are involved in importing other things, such as foods. So once the line item or entry has moved from the entry review side of the field component of the FDA, it may be examined by a consumer safety officer or a CSO. We have a few here in Houston, and I supervise the whole team. We have 11 CSOs in the area running around town doing examinations. The CSO will examine the product and may collect a sample which will be sent to one of our FDA laboratories for analysis. You know, evidence can be collected, and the CSO will record their findings as well as document their sample collection in our FDA electronic system back at the office. And then the lab will conduct their sample analysis and report their findings. The results will be reviewed by our compliance branch, and if found to be in compliance, the product will then be released. But if not, the product will be detained. And then there's a whole detention process where we allow for presentation of additional information or evidence to try to help release the cargo. I'm not going to go over into too much detail about how that goes, but just to give you an idea, there's still a process of that. So, and then on the next slide, so field personnel will examine products for evidence. Again, remember, this is not necessarily only for biologics. This is in general what we do with other products that we look at, devices, drugs, or food. So we look for evidence of filth, decomposition, misbranding, package defects, unapproved food and color additives, just to name a few. There are other things the CSO will look for, but these are just some examples. But with regards to biologics, what we look for would be the labeling, who is it addressed to, who is the shipper, and make sure that everything matches the documentation and the information that has been transmitted in the electronic entry with CBP. Next slide. This is kind of a complex flow chart, but it starts on the left, the importer. If you're an importer of any type of commodity that the FDA regulates, that's where you start. The ones in the blue on the side, we're not going to go into because that's specific to food. So it's a recap and an overall view of the life of an entry or a cargo shipment. So we moved the prior notice portion off to the side, like I said, the blue and green. But note, but note that these, like I said, is referring to food items. So on the left side, as I mentioned earlier, the entry review process generally begins with the importer and then the broker or the filer. And the filer is the one that transmits the information electronically through CBP. And I think somebody mentioned yesterday about their system. Now there is ACE, and that's basically the interface that information is entered. So CBP refers to entries that are FDA-regulated products to us based on codes that the importer and filer enters, like intended use code, product code, and things like that, and then it gets funneled to our own system. So the entry goes through a series of screenings and lookups. That's all automated in the system. And then the products are considered higher risk, and entries with incomplete, this is important. So entries or shipments with incomplete or inaccurate information may be flagged. I would say most likely flagged for a manual review. Manual review is done by one of our investigators or CSOs. So we have to look at it, and that could be a cause of delay. And we determine manually the admissibility status of a particular shipment that's been flagged. Our entry reviewers or the manual reviewers will then use internal databases within the FDA and other sources to determine admissibility. The entry reviewer may need additional information, so they may contact the broker, the filer, or the importer for additional information to help process the shipment to be cleared. Providing the documents, information in a timely manner helps our process. The line entry may be set up for examination or release or submitted to our compliance branch for a detention request, like I covered in the previous slides there. From there, the flow chart expands into various departments, such as the investigations, the lab, compliance branch, or it can be released into U.S. Commerce if the entry was found to be in compliance. The importer is responsible for making sure that your products, your biologics, comply with all U.S. requirements. Imported items, I think there was a question about that yesterday, whether it's the foreign manufacturer or it's the importer here in the United States. So for us, for the FDA, we put the burden on the importer as the responsible person for making sure these products are in compliance. Imported items should not be distributed into commerce until FDA has made an admissibility decision. They should be pretty much kept intact. You don't use it in the lab. You don't do work with the items that are imported unless you actually get an FDA may proceed. So, but products that do not comply with the U.S. requirements at the time of importation are subject to refusal of admission. So it could either be given a choice of destruction or re-exportation. So hopefully your shipments don't go into that realm of refusal process. So on the next slide, the next three slides are key import terms for reference. This is just for reference since I mentioned a lot of terms that may or may not be new to the audience. Most of them have already been kind of discussed, but I will recap here. So the first one is release or may proceed. That means the product will be released after determining that the shipment appears to meet admissibility requirements. There's a little typo there. And then the next one, request for documents or other info needed. If additional information is needed, then FDA will request documents. And after reviewing documents, we can either release them or set them up for examination or sampling, or request for a detention without a physical exam, and that's through our compliance branch. Examination is kind of self-explanatory. We go and we examine the product, and it will be done and either release and request detention or be sampled. We talked a little bit about what the examination looks like. We look for filth, decomposition. We look at labeling, product integrity, and stuff like that. Next slide. It's just a continuation of some of the terms. Sample collection is basically what it is. We submit a portion, or if there's not a lot of it, then we collect the whole thing for our lab analysis. So a lot of times we don't want to go there because some of these shipments are very limited. And in my experience, I personally haven't had any sample collection of biologics because, like I said, they're either high value or very limited in quantity, so there isn't much left if we do this step. And then there's the detention recommendation. It's a temporary action taken against the article. It's not a final decision. Like I said, we go through a process where you can, the importer or the filer or the broker can present evidence to refute the appearance of violations. So, and then we'll review that. It's basically due process. We allow you as the importer to provide evidence to us, and then we can make a final determination after that. Next slide. And the last key terms slide that I have includes other activities conducted by the FDA, and that's reconditioning, supervision, export verification, witnessing destructions, filer evaluations, as well as filer training or broker training and outreach to avoid any problems. And this is one of them. It's kind of an outreach to possible importers or filers to kind of relate what the expectations are by the agency to make sure everything flows smoothly. So now in the next slide, we're going to go through the specific requirements. How am I doing on time? 11, 17. Oh, okay. So
we do owe you some time, but I'm sorry, I was going to tell you, we do owe you some time. We also have some questions in the queue as well. So just to be aware.
Okay, so what are the regulatory requirements for CBER regulated products? What is required, right? So, and how do we verify compliance in entry? So next slide, we look at the information transmitted and compare the information in our internal database. If the information matches, then the compliance is generally verified. So it's very important that we receive good information to begin with. We look at the declared manufacturer, importer, consignee, product description, affirmation of compliance, and other information transmitted in the entry to make a decision. Next slide. This is one of the key slides. Slide 19, please. So this is one of the main slides that y'all need to take a look at, because this is the main requirements that we look at, or we look for. For most biological products, we are looking for these two requirements. One, biologics license, or BLN or STN, or the second one, which is IND number or investigational new drug number. If you don't have those two items, there could be some problems, and then we request for information. The biologics license number will be the number issued by the FDA to the manufacturer. So this is the foreign manufacturer of the biological products. The submission tracking number is the submission tracking number issued by us for the licensed biological product identified in the entry. The submission tracking number is associated with the manufacturer of any specific product. So we compare that information with the documents, and depending on if we do an exam, to make sure it is what it's said that it is supposed to be. You will need to submit affirmation of compliance, STN or BLN, and then the actual number. So for example, STN 123456. Do not just enter STN or BLN. That's going to get flagged for further review. An IND must be secured prior to interstate shipment and administration of any new products or biological products that is not subject to approved new drug application. So you have to have an IND if you don't have a BLN or an STN to get your products through. Next slide. So for human cells, tissues and cellular and tissue-based products, there are two requirements. One is that most foreign manufacturers are required to register and submit a list of every HCTP product that they manufacture. So, and then the second one on the next slide, foreign HCTP manufacturers, again, these are human cells, tissues, and cellular and tissue-based products. If the foreign manufacturers must meet the donor eligibility, current good tissue practices, reporting, labeling, inspection, and enforcement of establishment requirements. I went over that pretty quickly, so hopefully people got that. So the next item on slide 22, for CBER regulated biologics, there are also drug products. The requirements are: one, they have to have a foreign drug manufactured registration and drug approval, or two, again, an IND or investigational new drug application or a number. So if your biologic is also considered a drug, it has to be approved drug, or you have to present an IND number or an investigational new drug. That's the way to get it through FDA review. Establishments involved in the production and distribution of blood and blood products, medical devices, biological products, and HCTPs intended for commercial distribution in the U.S. are required to register and list annually with the FDA. So that expires every year. So that has to be done annually. Next slide. I know we're running out of time here. So biologics that are also considered to be medical devices must comply with the same requirements as medical devices regulated by the CDRH. I mentioned that's another center at our headquarters that deals specifically with devices. So they have their own set of requirements. Registration and listing is required, and 510K or pre-market notification or PMA or pre-market approval or an IDE, investigational device exemption, may be required. So it kind of really depends on what you're bringing in. Again, there's a website there. There's a link where you can view approved device list. Next slide, 24. In vitro diagnostic products are those reagents, instruments, and systems intended for use in the diagnosis of diseases or other conditions. And that includes a determination of the state of health in order to cure, mitigate, treat, prevent diseases. Such products are intended for use in the collection, preparation, and examination of specimens from the human body. So we do regulate these items also. IVDs are subject to pre-market or 510K and post-market controls such as registration listing, and they can't be adulterated, they can't be misbranded, and they have to, the manufacturer has to follow good manufacturing processes, etc. Next slide. Biological specimens used for testing. This is kind of a key point here. Biological specimens used for testing and research should be disclaimed, meaning you don't have to file an FDA entry. We don't regulate them. Should be disclaimed as they are not regulated by the FDA. So you can contact us through the email at the end of the presentation if you have any questions about that. Examples of specimens that I'm talking about include urine, stool, tissue affixed to a slide, blood, plasma, serum, and biopsies. So specific questions, we get a lot of questions about this. So I would recommend sending specific shipment questions to the email at the end to get more information on how that goes. But in general, I want to relay that testing and research for certain biological specimens are not regulated by us. Next slide. There are some special situations like U.S. goods return. So if you send them out and then they're coming in, there are they are still subject to the same requirements as any biological products that we just covered. So I just want to touch base on that really quickly. And then we're heading to the end here. So many of the data elements are required, but some elements are optional. We are on 27, okay. More details, could be gained from ACE training and things. CBP does some of that outreach about CBP, ACE process and all the codes that are needed. But for us, it's important to provide product code, correct intended use code, affirmation of compliance requirements, and your information that identifies your company. That's what we need to make sure the delays are avoided. We also have to try, next slide, avoid lookup failures that can cause a lot of delays. How do you avoid lookup failures? Basically, what I'm saying is we need to get accurate, correct information when there is filing for cargo. So if you're an importer, you have to work closely with your filers and brokers to make sure that they are using correct information. Next slide. This is just basically saying that there are a lot of delays that we see in biologic shipments, and so a lot of it, a huge chunk of it, 81%, is because they lack the information. They just don't provide the information. Others, 19%, is that they provide incorrect information. So just be aware of those delays. Next slide. This is just a further breakdown of what errors are, which is causing delays of any FDA review of your shipment. Slide 31. It's just a way for you, if you wanted to look at a list of licensed products. Here's the website. It's open to the public. And next slide is just additional resources where you can find additional guidance on what we do and what we expect. And it spills over to the next slide, and I would really suggest you get a copy of this because there's a lot of links and information embedded. So in slide 34, the one before this is the main email address for importing biologics for FDA. This is pretty much staffed 24 hours a day because we understand that there's a lot of perishable shipments that need attention quickly. So this is a way to ask questions readily, and we have people on standby to answer any questions. All right. Thanks for your time. That's all I have.
And we do have a couple questions in the queue. Real quick, Adam, if you can state some of the questions that we can address.
Sure. There's looks like three. I'm going to start with one of the easier ones. What is considered a high-risk product?
High-risk products really depends on the intended use. If it's going to go into a human being or animals, or compared to being tested in the lab, it makes a difference. We also look at the compliance history of the manufacturer. There's a lot of problems with the manufacturer, then that gets flagged as a high-risk product. We also look at the importer or the consignee. Who is this? Where is this going to? Is this a reputable place? And that raises, the high-risk level of a particular shipment depending on where it's going. So there's a lot of different factors that make that determination, on that. But generally, it depends on what you're bringing in.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. I'm going to go with one more. This question, what is included in human cell and tissue products? Is this for human use only? We have research labs importing cell lines for research only. That's how the question was phrased.
Human cells and tissue, I think I give some examples of those things. Sorry. So blood products, tissues, human cells, basically come from um, uh, human beings that are being used for research or even for reimplantation for transplants. So those things would be considered as that. But like I said, if there are certain things that are allowed to enter if they are only for research. Research is kind of a general term, but you can even qualify for bringing these in under investigational use. So I would really advise to give more details on what you're trying to import and what the intended use is using that email address, and specific guidance can really vary depending on what it is, what it's going to be used for, where is it going to be in a clinical study where it will be used on human beings, or will it be in a laboratory environment? So a lot of different factors really go into the research and the type of tissue and human cells that are bringing in.
Thank you for that, sir. And then the last question from the chat: are FDA regulated imported products for use in humans only? For example, if we receive DNA vaccines for use in mice, is that under the FDA purview?
Yes.
That's a nice simple one. I like that.
Yes, it is actually, yes, definitely under FDA purview, and we will require an FDA entry to be filed. So going through all that process with your broker or filer. In cases that this goes through a passenger clearance environment, it's being hand carried, then we would expect CBP to make a referral to our office to make a final determination, or to at least a chance to review what is being brought in.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yep, that's the last one from the chat, Mary. So we're good. Thank you.
Great presentation. A lot of interest. Okay.